going on, guys, and welcome back to Peaky Blinders Series 6 Episode 3 review. So this episode literally had no action in, it's getting very political, and it does take a lot of concentration. The Peaky Blinders in the first few seasons are very different to the Peaky Blinders episodes now. So anyway, enough waffling, let's get into it. Scene 1, we see Tommy with Ruby in his arms running through the hospital. Ruby's unconscious, she's very ill. Lizzie and Tommy are very distressed. Tommy's going through his gypsy mindset and saying no nurse can touch her, I need a doctor to touch her and look after her. And then that's what we learn what's wrong with Ruby. So the doctor says to Tommy, Ruby is very infectious. She has a thing called consumption, which is in other words called tuberculosis. This basically involves the lungs, and there's fluid in the lungs and you can't breathe properly and it makes you really ill. So the doctor is saying, look, Ruby's very ill, we've got some procedures, give her now, you and Lizzie need testing as well, it's really serious. Tommy says here, I don't give a shit about me or Lizzie or our health, we give a shit about Ruby, you look after her, that's my daughter you're dealing with. So Tommy gives over Ruby to the doctor, and then Tommy tries to walk into the room that they're treating her on, and these two doctors push him back and Tommy nearly hits the doctor, and then Lizzie parks him up and says, Tommy, come on, you can't be doing this in the hospital, think about who you are and think about what you're doing. And then Tommy says, you know what, you're right Lizzie, I'm sorry, let me just calm down. And then they make some excuse that Tommy has addiction, and Tommy puts his hand up and says, I'm sorry guys to all the patients and doctors and nurses watching. So now Ruby's getting treated, we remain in the hospital, and now Tommy is getting x-rayed or examined or tested in this red ultraviolet light to check that he hasn't got consumption himself. While he's doing this, he's supposed to stay still when he's just talking to himself, and it's only for a matter of seconds we see him getting tested. So after we see Tommy getting tested, then we're still in the hospital once again, and we see him and Lizzie sitting on the stairs outside the hospital. Lizzie basically explains once again to Tommy it's tuberculosis because Tommy wasn't listening and he was in his mindset of only a doctor can touch my daughter because it's a gypsy spell and it's nothing to do with medical science, it's a gypsy spell. So then Lizzie explains that it's tuberculosis but also the treatment they're going to be doing on Ruby. They're saying the first thing they're going to do is collapse the lung, which is a thing I think they still do now. It's basically collapsing the lung because the lung can treat itself or something, and also Ruby's going to be on this salt and gold or whatever it is, and it made Tommy quite astonished. I can't believe she's having this. And then Tommy asks the question, what are the chances of her surviving? And Lizzie says, well, the doctors aren't saying, but it is quite small. The fact that it's a small child with this bad disease spreading the lungs, it's not looking good. And then the final scene we see for now in the hospital is Tommy talking to Ruby. Ruby's unconscious on the bed and Tommy's talking to her. He should be wearing a mask, and Lizzie says that, but Tommy says, I'm already wearing a mask. He's got these gypsy spells protecting him. So then Tommy and Lizzie swap, and Lizzie stays with Ruby while Tommy goes back to his office in London where he makes a call to Ada. So as we saw last episode, then Ada basically said to Tommy that I don't want to be part of this business anymore, you can hold the bucket yourself. When Tommy gets back from hospital, he calls Ada and says, Ada, I need you for 5 days, Ruby's sick, and please step into my shoes and help me. Obviously Ada's family, and of course she would because of Ruby's illness, and she goes to London and does some bad bitch moves. So after Tommy asking Ada on the phone, we go towards Mosley's house, or what we think is his house. So Mistress Diana sees Ada pulling up to the house, and then she tells the butler to answer the door, but also to tell her what type of designer jacket is Ada wearing. And as soon as we see that, he jumps to Tommy and he's looking at this red rope on a field. He's in his car, he's driving up this mountain, probably the same mountain as the start of season 5, and he sees this red rope in the field, and it's some sort of clue to where the Lee family are, which is obviously where Esme is. We then jump straight back to Ada and Diana, and they have some interesting conversations. So the first conversation they have is Diana saying that poverty is linked with genetics. Ada, in the nicest way possible, disagrees, and then Diana goes into her genetics. A gypsy family, loads of siblings, one becomes this MP and OBE, and another one likes Egyptian vase because Ada mentions about the Egyptian vase on the table. Ada then makes a joke and says that's just our genetics, isn't it? And the theme of genetics, Jewish people and gypsies will be coming up again. So like I said, Ada started talking about the Egyptian vase on the table and really studying it and telling her information about it, and Diana was like, how the hell do you know about Egyptian vase? Obviously there's been so much research going into this meeting between Ada and Diana, both sides. So then Ada explains why Tommy isn't at the meeting today and why Ada is here instead, and that's obviously because Ruby's ill. Diana's a bit puzzled by this and saying, hasn't he got a maid or something for that kind of thing? And then Ada explains it's quite serious. The next thing that happens is Diana offers Ada a drink, and they both sit next to each other and drink whiskey, and then Diana brings up a topic called the Great Cleansing, and Diana basically says, when the time comes and the meeting happens, I will say that the Jews should be dealt with, but the gypsies should be spared. And basically basically the year's 1913 in the Peaky Blinders, and if anyone knows in German history, from about 1932 or 1933, the Nazi party start putting in policies against Jewish people that go progressively worse, to the point in the 40s where there was massive concentration camps for Jewish people to die. But also we learned the gypsies died as well, and so did disabled people and people from other backgrounds. This shocks Ada a bit, and you can see the way she's looking at her when Diana isn't looking. It actually takes her back a bit, like, God, I didn't even think she was that brutal. But then Diana ends it saying, let's just drink whiskey and wait for the American, not even mentioning Jack Nelson's name. It's weird how everyone's rivals, but they've all got to be together and friends. It's so weird, but obviously understandable why that is. So then we see Tommy get out of his car. He's found wherever he wants to go, and he's found the Lee camp. He gets confronted by a few male Lee brothers, and then Esme tells him to back off, and Esme and Tommy start speaking. Tommy says to Esme that Ruby's really ill. What's happened? Have you done the curse? And Tommy could already tell, even the first time of telling Esme about Ruby's illness, Esme had nothing to do with it, and Esme did not put this curse on Ruby. Obviously, Tommy was probably hoping Esme was the one that did the curse, because it'd be so easy to reverse the curse, and Tommy could persuade Esme to reverse it. So then after that brief discussion, it goes back to Oswald Mosley's house, but this time Oswald Mosley enters. Oswald Mosley enters, and the reason he enters is because Jack Nelson and Gina are pulling up outside the house. Oswald Mosley expresses how annoyed he is that Tommy isn't here, and Ada obviously explains that, you know, tuberculosis, and Oswald Mosley says, hasn't he got a wife, or something like that, and Ada's looking at him like, you're a knob. Oswald Mosley also tells Diana the make of Ada's coat, to which he said that it was a very expensive brand, and then, which was quite funny, Diana responded saying, but the perfume I can smell on you is very cheap. Obviously Diana is Mosley's mistress, not wife yet, so I think Oswald's still sleeping around. Anyway, the next thing that happens I thought was so sick. Ada tells Oswald and Diana to basically, I'm going to be in charge of this conversation, I've got the information, and I can help Jack Nelson talk to you, to shut the fuck up and let me do the speaking. I love that. I absolutely love that, because you think that Oswald Mosley's got all this power, but then it just really humbles him, and Ada's the actual one in charge. So then Jack Nelson and Gina both enter together. Jack Nelson comes so confidently and arrogantly walking in saying, I don't want to do any small talk introductions. Gina's been telling me that the Shelbys talk to these dead people and that. And they said, who is a Shelby here? Ada then stands up and he's like, oh, you must be the sister, you intrigue me. Men don't intrigue me, women do. Ada, talk to me, how are you? Have you got a husband? And then Ada said, oh yeah, my husband's dead. Obviously we said that season 5, but I still talk to him a lot, which I thought was quite funny, because obviously he was like, oh, the Shelbys talk to dead people. It's quite funny because Oswald Mosley and Jack Nelson don't actually talk to each other much. All Jack Nelson says to Oswald Mosley is, I hear you're going to be the future Prime Minister of England, to which he said, yes I am. Like, they didn't really talk much, it was more between Ada and Jack Nelson, but then again Ada was leading the conversation. So then after that, Jack Nelson, like everyone else, asks, why isn't Thomas Shelby here? Ada then says she's really ill. Ada flips it on Jack Nelson. Run it again, Ada flips it on Jack Nelson. Says to Jack Nelson, I've been researching you as well, mate, and I know that your brother and sister died of the consumption when you were younger. To which Jack Nelson looked at her like, who are you messing with? And then Ada carries on saying, well, that's now entered our family, so respect us and we'll respect you, so shut up, mate, you know, we're in charge here. And Jack Nelson basically looks with a bit of respect to her. Jack Nelson goes on and says that I would do the exact same thing that Tommy does, and he also intrigues me. Ada then looks at Diana and says, he intrigues a lot of people, and stares at her for a good 5 seconds. What does that mean? That stare is more than nothing. I tell you that now. Remember that stare. Remember in episode 1 that stare as well with the rally. Remember it. Diana dodges it though quite quickly and says, well, everyone admires my Oswald as well. You know, 20 million people turn to his rally, etc. And I'm like, just shut up, would you, little sket? And then this little meeting or social event ends with Ada saying, you're all invited to Thomas Shelby's house, and also the Irish will be there, the IRA, obviously, Laura, to discuss the future of Europe. So next episode will be a thriller with that scene in it. So the next scene we see is Tommy and Esme. Tommy's walking from the Lee camp back to his car. He tries to start the engine, it's not working. Why? Because Esme Shelby took a part out of the car. Esme Shelby arrives at the car and says, I actually know a bit about this spell or curse that you're talking about. And Esme goes to him and says, I think I know a bit of information about why Ruby's ill. Obviously Tommy wants to know it, so Esme puts the part back in and both of them get in the car and drive. The last thing we hear during this scene is Esme saying that I want to show you a dead body that's got the curse. We then jump back to Tommy's office in Birmingham where we see Ada walking through, and one of the receptionists or secretaries or whatever you want to call it says to her, you can't go in there if Tommy's not there. And Ada says, look at me, I'm a Shelby, shut up, do your job, give me the keys. And then the secretary goes, of course mom, here are the keys. And then the secretary says, do you want a drink of anything? Ada goes, I want whiskey. The secretary goes, well Tommy doesn't allow whiskey. And then Ada says, we'll find someone that'll get whiskey. Ada's in charge and she's showing she's got the balls for it. Straight away we see Ada go from Birmingham to Small Heath. Small Heath, the place where it started, episode 1, series 1, the betting shop in Small Heath. We see it, it's Thomas Shelby's old house and the family house. This is where Isaiah and Arthur is based. So the reason that Ada has gone to Small Heath to talk to Isaiah is because she's seen in Thomas Shelby's diary that people are stealing opium from the Liverpool docks he talked about in last episode. She basically puts Isaiah in charge of this mission to get the opium back and beat up whoever's done it, and also bring Arthur for the credibility. Isaiah is quite happy by this and then also brings Arthur. He says to Arthur, look, I think we need a bit of backup now, and Isaiah brings all of his cousins and Arthur approves, and all of them go off to Liverpool to have this fight. We then jump to the garrison and we see Lizzie and Ada in the garrison drinking, and Lizzie catching up with Ada and telling her what's what. She informs Ada about the illness and Ruby's treatment, which obviously makes Ada shocked once again. I think Ada mentions that she knows someone that died on this treatment, but they were much older and Ruby should fight through it because of her youth. Lizzie's basically complaining about Tommy, saying, you know, it's 1913, he's climbing up a bloody mountain because he thinks it's some gypsy spell. Move with science, move with the times, Tommy. It's not a gypsy curse, it's just unfortunately ill health. Lizzie talks about how she wants a normal man in her life. Thomas Shelby is no normal man, I'll tell you that now. And Lizzie's just very upset, bless her. You know, it is quite a difficult thing to talk about. I think this is probably the first time where I genuinely think Lizzie and Ada both think the worst for Ruby. So this man that they're looking for in Liverpool is a man called Aidan Stagg. And Isaiah basically goes around to these lads and say, where is he? Where's Aidan Stagg? Where's Aidan Stagg? Tell me now. And it didn't really make much notice. And then Isaiah dashed one of them to the floor and said, this is what I'm talking about. We're being serious now. I'm not taking the piss. To which then obviously the famous actor Stephen Graham comes in as Aidan Stagg and says, I'm Aidan Stagg. He has a football. He kicks the football. Isaiah gets a gun, bang, bursts the football. Arthur Shelby then goes up to Aidan Stagg and says that you've been dealt with the Black Star, mate, because you've been stealing from the Shelby Company Limited by stealing our opium. So Arthur says to Stagg, you know, you've been dealt with the Black Star, and I think what Black Star basically means is death. Arthur says he's going to feel generous. The punishment is not going to be death, it's just going to be a brutal beating here right now. Arthur and Stagg stare at each other for a few seconds, and then Stagg goes on this massive tangent to Arthur, basically saying, look comrade, both of us fought in France, and the only way I got through France is by having morphine. Now he made this joke saying he didn't know the war finished until 1924, obviously it finished in 1918, but because he was on morphine and so high, he didn't realise the war was finished until 1924. He's basically saying to Arthur, I can give you unlimited morphine if you don't beat me up. But also how Arthur's changed, he said that rumours go across the canal, so to Liverpool. So from Birmingham to Liverpool, there's been some rumours about Arthur recently that he's not the man he used to be. Probably because his wife left and also he hasn't seen his kids in a long time. Stagg says this very, very interesting sentence that Arthur now needs a stick, aka Isaiah and his men, to do the beatings for him. Arthur can't cope, he's not the man he used to be, he's not as strong. And then Stagg finished with basically saying, your kids can't help you, your wife can't help you, you can help yourself. Have a look at me, this is who you can become. Isaiah takes matters into his own hands and hits him himself. And Isaiah says to Arthur, just give me the order and I'll do it. Arthur then stands down after 20 seconds and says don't hurt him, and then pushes Isaiah off and he'll leave without anyone getting harmed at all. I mean, on one hand you could argue that he's getting weak, but on the other hand you can argue that what happened in episode 2 is still fresh in Arthur's mind, that if he is good with his actions, more chance Linda will come home. Then again, I doubt Tommy wants Arthur to be the nice guy right now. So there are 2 more scenes in this episode of Peaky Blinders. The second last, the penultimate scene, goes back to Esme and Tommy. Esme takes Tommy to this grave and basically explains this. There was a mother with a 7-year-old girl, and this 7-year-old girl died of consumption, the same thing Ruby has, aka tuberculosis, and she started to get ill as soon as she started wearing this sapphire necklace. And where have we heard about this sapphire necklace before? We heard about it in season 3 episode 2 when the Russian SARS representative gives Tommy that ruby necklace that he gives to his wife Grace. Grace wears it at this charity event, and bang, a Soviet shoots her. Tommy's wife died from this cursed ruby necklace. And then Tommy in season 3 episode 3 gives the ruby necklace to someone called Anna Boswell or something like that. And she said that if she would destroy the curse, there'd be no more curse in the family or whatever. Well, obviously the curse went to someone else. So anyway, this daughter that wore the ruby necklace eventually died, and then Esme seems to think that the mother did a massive curse on Thomas Shelby. Tommy's then so desperate, he gets the crucifix, which resembles the burial, and absolutely dashes it to Narnia, and basically said, I'll pay this woman £10,000, £20,000, I will pay anything for her to reverse this spell. However, Esme says that, you know, she moved abroad, she moved over the seas, it's going to take ages to find her, and Tommy said, you tell your people, I'll tell my people, we'll find it together, I'll give you gold, Esme, I'll give you whatever you want, we need to find this woman to reverse the spell. I think deep down Esme thinks that they'll never find this woman though, and Esme actually says to Tommy, I genuinely believe the science will work, you know, science these days are taking over the angels of the gypsies, etc, because obviously it's 1930, time's moving on, there's more technology. And Tommy basically ends it with Ruby will be well, and says that a few times, Ruby will be well, I'll tell anyone that since I've stopped the whiskey, the spirits are telling me Ruby will be well. However, then we jump to the last scene, and unfortunately Ruby passes away. Lizzie is sitting in the waiting room and can see Tommy driving to hospital. Tommy gets out of the car and Lizzie shouts in the pouring rain, where were you? Where the fuck were you? And then Tommy's quite jolly, you know, I've got these things that maybe could help it. And then Lizzie says, you're too late, she's dead, you've just missed her. I had to give your last hug for you, you missed it, she's dead. Then we see Tommy in shock for about a minute, just in the pouring rain, staring out, completely shocked and absolutely gutted. Something that got brought to my attention by someone I know said that there's such a similarity between the way Lizzie says where the fuck were you in season 6 episode 3 and also the way she says where the fuck were you in season 2 episode 6, where Tommy basically made Lizzie be a prostitute for the final time with that soldier so he could kill the soldier for Winston Churchill. I thought that was quite interesting. But yeah, that's how season 6 episode 3 ended. Ruby Shelby is dead. Now what does this mean for series 6 episode 4? Well, one thing we can guarantee is Oswald Mosley, the Mistress Diana, Jack Nelson and Gina Gray are all going to be coming to Thomas Shelby's house to have a meeting about the shaping of Europe in the future. I can't wait for Tommy, Oswald and Jack Nelson to be talking at the same time. There's going to be scenes, it's going to be so good. Another thing I think is going to happen in season 6 episode 4 is obviously the gypsy funeral of Ruby Shelby. Obviously we've seen it quite a few times in Peaky Blinders now. There's going to be that hearse that they burn. But yeah, I've got a feeling obviously the IRA, the Laura girl, will be in it again because she's also going to be at this meeting with Oswald Mosley, the Mistress Diana, and also Jack Nelson and Gina Gray. I think Alfred Solomon is going to have a big part in next episode. He wasn't in it at all this episode, but I think he's going to have a big part in next episode with the opium trade. I mean, in the nicest way possible. Hopefully this can make Tommy just focus on business now that he hasn't got this dying daughter. And also, what does this marriage mean for Lizzie? Because the only reason that Lizzie and Tommy really got married wasn't because of love. It was because they had the baby and they felt that they had to because Tommy was an MP now. Because don't forget, Tommy's son Charlie belongs to Grace, not Lizzie. Lizzie is not the mother of Charlie. There's many things that need answering, and we did an episode full of action next Sunday. So if you enjoyed this review, make sure you give it a like. If you're new, make sure you subscribe, and also leave down below your predictions or also what you thought of this review. And also we'll be back next week with season 6 episode 4 review of the Peaky Blinders. And yes, see you in the next video.